Hello there, Dave Hyder, MindGap. Just a short video here on emotional intelligence and the importance of that, particularly in the context of leadership. It's becoming one of the most researched topics really over the last few years. Emotional intelligence, super important. We're going to explain what it is, how to develop it, etc. etc. You can see on the screen here that there's huge amounts of research that's been done around emotional intelligence. Some of the kind of top universities, management schools, etc. I would say emotional intelligence has been one of the main areas of focus over the last few years. That sense of measurement of how people relate to themselves and relate to others, how they manage themselves, how they manage relationships with others, as we're going to come to in a moment, has become as important, some would say more important, than academic intelligence. So in other words, that ability to get a degree, to get a qualification, to come with your CV for a job and present yourself as someone who academically is intelligent, of course is important, of course. But actually what's kind of risen up behind that is this need for people to be able to relate to each other. You might have a brain, you might have been able to do some study, but can you actually manage yourself and can you manage relationships with other people has become a super important topic. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the screen here looking at various different indicators, but if you want to pause the video, you can have a look at the research that's gone in. Some of it's quite tenuous, but it suggests that actually people with levels of emotional intelligence are much better leaders. They develop a better outcome and return for their businesses. They work with people who stay longer, work longer. Lots and lots of research there with some QR codes on the right hand side if you want to dig into that a little bit more. Let's just unpack it just for a second then. Daniel Goleman, who's one of the guys that's kind of popularised emotional intelligence. It's been around for quite some time. This kind of study of who we are, how we're wired, how we relate to other people has been going on for many, many years. But Daniel Goleman kind of popularised this concept of emotional intelligence, and you can see his kind of definition on the screen. It's this ability, and break these areas down really, this ability to recognise, understand and then manage our own emotions. Three specifically distinctly different things. Some people are very good at recognising emotions, some very good at understanding them, cognitively, conscious, unconscious, interpreting those emotions, and then the ability to manage our emotions, a separate and distinct thing. And the culmination of all of those three together help us. But that's about managing ourselves. That's 50% of emotional intelligence, as it were. Managing our own emotions, recognising our emotions. When we get that kind of bubbling up of stress or anxiety or concern or excitement or adrenaline, whatever it is, that we can recognise those emotions, that we can understand them, that we can give them a label, as it were, but then we can manage them, we can self-regulate, as we're going to talk about a little bit later. We can regulate our emotions, almost like turn the gas down on those emotions or turn the gas up maybe on those emotions. Second part of this then is to recognise, understand and then influence the emotions of others. So this is where we start to forget ourselves for a second and start to look to other people. How well do we relate to others? It's only my experience, but some people who are very good at managing their own emotions, managing their own stress, controlling themselves, are not so good maybe at reaching out to others and a level of emotional intelligence with others. They're good at managing themselves, not so good with others. Other people, in my experience, are very good at managing their relationships with others, but sometimes give too much of themselves to others to manage their own internal stresses and so on. But just my opinion. See what you think. So in practical terms, Daniel Goleman says this means being aware of the emotions, how they can drive our behaviour and impact people positively and negatively, and then learn how to manage those emotions, both our own and others as well, especially when we're under pressure, because we know that kind of red mist appears potentially under pressure at times. We typically go to emotion rather than logic, and emotional intelligence challenges us to stay in that really strong space of managing ourselves and managing other people as well. I'm not going to take too long on these next two slides, but a little bit about inputs and outputs. In other words, where do we get emotional intelligence from? Where do we acquire it from? If we were a sponge, where would we be absorbing it from? But then outputs, what does it look like when we manifest emotional intelligence? When we look like a very emotionally intelligent person? I regularly use that phrase, they're super emotionally intelligent. What am I seeing? What are the characteristics that I'm seeing there? So on the screen, first of all, and this is just opinion from a little bit of research, see what you think, where do we get emotional intelligence from. So some of it's from personality. You might have had a PPA psychometric test or some other kind of tests, and you can see that actually as part of that report you've got strong areas on emotional intelligence. Maybe you're good at relating to others, that high I on the DISC profile, etc. Our internal feelings, what's going on underneath, that ability for me to kind of recognise what's going on in the engine room of my personality, my motivators, do I know what they are? So that level to which I understand myself under the iceberg, I think is the level to which emotional intelligence spills out in each of us. How we interpret the world around us. Do we have this ability to kind of read the room? We're going to come to this a little bit later, but that ability to kind of watch people and interpret, almost make sense of what they're thinking, how we're feeling, connecting with people and then interpreting how they seem to be in our minds and thinking those things through. Emotional intelligence might come from our upbringing or not. We might have been raised in a fairly challenging, brutal environment and our emotions were pretty squashed, maybe some of us from generations gone by, or we might have been raised in a way that's very strongly emotionally intelligent. Our view of the world, how we see the world, whether we are externally focused or whether we're just bothered about ourselves, I think that helps top up our tank of emotional intelligence. Stephen Covey brings in this concept of paradigms, almost like the lenses through which you see life, whether you're a half full or a half empty person. That's part of emotional intelligence. Just reflect on yourself and check in with yourself as to, are some of these things meaning that you're emotionally intelligent maybe, or there's work to do. Inquiries down on there, how genuinely interested are you in people? Or are you quite self-focused? Do you inquire with people? Do you lean into the conversations and ask them more questions? And how well, finally, do you manage your emotions? We're going to come to this concept of emotional regulation. Do you tend to be led by your emotions? Are you in control of them or are they in control of you? You kind of catch yourself and you go, oh, I've done it again, and you reel in those emotions. Just you might want to pause the video there and just kind of reflect on, how strong am I then on emotional intelligence? Just take a moment not to race through the video, but think, where have my emotions come from? Historically, now, where do I draw levels of emotional intelligence from? We're going to use this little diagram that's on the screen in a slightly different way. It comes from a company called Thomas International, who we do our psychometrics through. And what I find useful about this is it breaks it down into kind of some facets about emotional intelligence. And the colours don't come through great on here, but Thomas International do an emotional intelligence test and break things down into the green and yellow areas. This second kind of line down is meant to be yellow. So green at the top, yellow underneath, green being well-being, areas of well-being. And we're going to come to a little scoring matrix a little bit later to have a guess as to what's your levels of happiness when you look around you, when you talk to friends, when you meet mates down the pub or go out socially. When you compare yourself to them, how happy would you say you are? Maybe on a scale of 1 to 100. We're going to come to that little reflection just in a moment. But happiness, this is all these aspects here are part of emotional intelligence. Happiness, how happy are you? That's part of emotional intelligence. Optimistic when we look to the future. Happy is present when we look to the future. How optimistic are we about the future? Are we aware of what might be coming in the future, and how optimistic do we feel about it? Our levels of self-esteem, confidence, how I feel about myself. Those three areas at the top there are levels of well-being, we call those. Then we'll come to a circle around this in a moment, but round to these next three areas, which are about how we manage ourselves internally. So this phrase that I've used a couple of times, emotional regulation. How well do I manage my emotions? Am I in charge of them or vice versa? Impulse control. Do I tend to be led by urges, by impulse? I've kind of done something and thought, I've done it again and I need to reel back from it. How well do you control your impulses? Do you control them too much? Some would say that too much impulse control is a bad thing, and sometimes it's good to act with gut feel or impulse. But how good are you, would you say, at impulse control? Management of stress management. How well do you manage your stress? These top two lines are about me and how well I manage myself, my internal emotional intelligence. The red and the light blue areas then are about how I manage other people. So levels of empathy, that ability, as I'm sure you've heard, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and really genuinely feel for them. How well do you pull that tool out the toolbox sometimes? How empathetic are you? Not all day, every day, but when it really matters, do you know how to be empathetic? Emotional perception, that ability that someone kind of walks in the room in the morning and you sort of spot them and say, "You're right, John, you don't look yourself at the moment. Is everything okay?" It's almost like you've read something, your antennaes open to something that's not a physical manifestation, but there's just a combination of events that's made you pick up that something's maybe not well. How emotionally perceptive are you? Emotional expression. Are you a bit of a closed book on the outside, or are you quite expressive with your emotions? You can see, because I'm doing this video, I'm quite expressive with my emotions, but there's other times that I can be quite closed emotionally expressive wise. Are those windows open? Johari's window might be something you want to have a look at on the web. There's a great little model about whether our windows are closed or our windows are open on our emotions. Some people really radiate emotion through their faces. Other people are quite closed and cold, maybe, in terms of showing emotions. It's not good or bad, but emotional intelligence is about us having our window open, uncomplicated, ready to share our emotions with others. And then relationships, the breadth and depth is the fourth area of others. The breadth, depth, the quality of relationships. Do you tend to have a small circle of friends or a wide circle of friends, and how quality are your relationships? Last three, light blue, emotional management. This is about other people, remember, so this is about how well you manage other people's emotions. So if you've got someone in your team who's a little bit of a drama queen, ebbs and flows on emotions, do you find that really problematic and challenging to manage others' emotions? Or are you good at managing the ebb and flow of others' emotions? Assertiveness, something that quite often goes with self-esteem, links with self-esteem at the top there. But how assertive are you? Not too much, not too little, but good levels of assertiveness and confidence. And then social awareness, this ability to kind of go into a working environment, into a conference, into an event, into a party, and you kind of read the room very well. How assertive are you? Last two areas Thomas talk about that don't fit into the external or the internal. Adaptability, how adaptable are you? Are you good with change management? Do you find yourself quite flexible in terms of approaches at work and at home as well? Are you quite rigid and stuck? Emotionally intelligent people are quite adaptable. And in self-motivation, this sense that we don't need external stimulation for motivation, but actually we've got our own engine room going on inside. We're going to come to the criteria, the kind of assessment criteria on that in a moment, and we'll have a look at that. I'm going to pause the video there, just take a moment to reflect. These are the 5 areas that Daniel Goleman talks about as areas of emotional intelligence, and we're just going to concentrate on these 5 areas just for the remaining kind of 20 minutes, maybe just to very quickly go through these 5 areas of emotional intelligence. You can see that some of them relate to me and how I manage myself, self-regulation, how motivated am I, and how self-aware am I, and then the other 2 aspects that relate to other people, empathy and social skills. So we're just going to have a quick look at those 5 different areas. Let's just put some sort of definition on them, and then we'll very quickly walk through these 5 areas. Self-awareness, that healthy sense we're not too negative about ourselves, we're not too positive. We've got this kind of good balance in the middle, that we've got a healthy sense of our own awareness. We understand our strengths, our weaknesses. If you've been on training that we've delivered, hopefully, and if you've had psychometrics, hopefully that's all about opening up your ability to be more aware of yourself and know yourself better. That ability to kind of handle and learn from constructive criticism, feedback, 360s, we're going to cover that in a minute. How well do you take challenge and feedback? That's self-awareness. How self-aware are you? Self-regulation. Again, we're back to this same area again. Can you maturely reveal your emotions and exercise restraint and control when needed? Really important in leadership particularly. That ability to sense what's going on and manage oneself before it spills out. Motivation. What motivates you? We're just going to touch on that super briefly. It's a huge topic that people focus on and we do training on. But how do we understand what the engine room is within me? Do I know what the buttons are that make me more motivated? Do I know how to tap into those areas of motivation so that I can keep myself Self-motivated, empathy, a really important kind of human skill, that ability to put yourself in others' shoes and genuinely respond to people's concerns or frustrations, problems. And then, as we say, social skills, that ability to build rapport quickly, read the room, not get involved in power struggles, but enjoying that social space and people skills. So let's just unpack these 5 super quick and give you maybe some specifics to focus on. Just a little diagram really when we're talking about self-awareness. For me, these self-awareness comes from 3 paradigms, 3 perspectives maybe that I get feedback through. First of all, at the top here, my own view of myself. That's a critical part of your self-awareness. What you think of yourself is critically important. But I don't know about you, my experiences, my own view of myself sometimes is challenged when I get feedback from other people. I come across not quite as I expected. I get feedback that tells me, oh, I didn't think that's how you were feeling or thinking or acting. So my own view of me on its own is not sufficient, not good enough. We need, secondly, other views of us. You can see down the bottom right hand corner, and I'm going to give you some suggestions in a minute. 360 feedback, just listening to feedback, listening to what people say about you is a really important area. If you go back to Harry's window that I've talked about, which is a model you can find on the web, it's that sense of kind of asking for feedback that opens the window into self-awareness. The blind spots start to disappear when we get feedback from other people. Maybe after this video you could just take a moment getting some feedback from people. I've got a suggestion as to how you can do that in a minute. The third way that I'm particularly a fan of is psychometrics, and although they're not perfect, they're not ideal, they're not kind of, a 100% categorical science, they are a great opportunity to answer a series of questions, self-report as we call it, and then through algorithms, if it's a kind of clever system online like the Thomas International systems we use, or other self-report systems, you're getting feedback as to what psychologists or people that have done these psychometric tests. And for me, it's a collection of you in the middle here is a collection of all of those 3 areas. It is about your view, but it's also about the view of others, and it's also about psychometrics. So that's a good way of becoming more self-aware. I'm going to send the link to this video through. There's a video on this next slide, and you can just kind of click on the link, and that will talk to you about self-awareness and the importance of almost kind of jumping in the helicopter at work at times and looking down at ourselves. Kind of being self-aware sometimes is detaching yourself from you in the moment and kind of looking down on yourself and saying, what's going on for me at the moment? Am I better? Am I worse? Do I need to improve in some ways? How am I managing my relations with people? Reflective practice, we call it in a coaching context, and that might be something that you can build into your regular working week, is some reflective practice. I quite often recommend to sort of people that I'm coaching that are very busy senior leaders, just pull into a little kind of lay-by on the way home from work and grab a notebook and just take a moment and think about the week. Think about what's gone well for you, what's not gone well. Why has it not gone well? Why has it gone well? What's coming up next week that you could improve on? That sense of sort of self-awareness, checking in with yourself as to how things are going at the moment is really important. Some thoughts on the screen here that might help you. Self-reflection, we've just been talking about. Feedback, psychometrics, paying attention to how you're feeling. That meeting that you've just had, when you disconnect on the call or you come out of the meeting room and just think, how well did I do in that meeting? That constant internal dialogue maybe is a good thing on self-awareness to keep yourself sharp. Taking stock of emotional strengths and weaknesses, checking in. We're going to present a couple of tools in a moment that you can do that might help you take stock of your strengths and weaknesses. And then just remembering that nothing stays forever. Emotions are fleeting, things can move on. So actually it's about you and your ongoing development going forward. There's a couple of little tools that are on the screen here which might help you with your self-awareness. Here's the 5 areas from Daniel Goleman again, what some of those definitions are, some of the hallmarks. You might want to just stop the video now and look at this on the screen and just score yourself maybe 1 to 10. How self-aware are you at the moment? 1 to 10. What else could you do? You could pop some actions in the right hand column there. Self-regulation. Do you regulate your emotions? Do you find yourself saying things before really you should have done? Score yourself again. Motivation, empathy, people skill, all those areas that we've been through. Just take a moment to reflect on those. Give yourself a score, self-assess. And then that right hand column, what could you do to develop in that area that would make you a more emotionally intelligent person? If there's a particular area you think, I'm not particularly good in motivation or maybe self-awareness, contact us and we'll give you some resources, some videos, some articles to read, because sometimes these concepts are quite flaky, quite difficult to grapple with, and we need to understand. And there's so many people that have written books about self-regulation and self-awareness, so be a kind of a student of these areas, really dig into them. We spend years at times going to university and studying academic subjects. Why don't we give the same level of attention to our emotional intelligence? So this is a self-assessment tool here. The second area that we talked about was getting feedback from others, 360 feedback from others. And this is a super simple little sheet that you could just print off. I can give you a copy if you want me to email it to you, but you can just screenshot it otherwise. I would suggest that you send this little suite of words out to your manager, to some peers, maybe 2 or 3 different peers, people in your teams and others as well, and ask them to choose, as you can see from the top here, 2 areas from list A and 1 area from list B. You could do more if you wanted to. But them identifying you, giving you feedback, what they think. The list A are a little bit more negative, challenging words. List B, more positive words, should I say. List B, a little bit more challenging words. And so you'll get some feedback from people. And if you've given it to the people that I've just mentioned, you're going to start opening your window to see how you come across to other people. And then, as I said, on the triangle, you can compare that with your own thoughts and how you feel you're doing in certain areas. The third and final little tool that I'm just going to offer to you here on the self-awareness is exactly the same as I showed you on the Thomas International little blocks, but this is in a wheel now. You could print this off and just take your time to go round these. Do you remember these different areas? Well-being, green, self-control, yellow, emotion ability, that ability to relate to other people, in red, and then sociability, that ability to look out to the wider world. Score yourself. Just give yourself a score. Imagine it like a tyre, with whether you think you're below average in an area. Put a little cross in the box here. Average in an area compared to Joe Public, people that you know. Average in the middle, and then above average around the outside. Be really tough on yourself, really critical, and score yourself. Put a little star and then join those stars up together to see what the tyre looks like. Does it look a bit deflated in some areas or a bit inflated in other areas? And maybe needs a little bit of air of the tyre let out because it's a little bit overly inflated. Maybe you could do an as is and to be. So what do you think your wheel looks like at the moment? And what would you like it to be in 6 or 12 months' time? Where would you like it to be? So just reflect, take some time, pause the video now, print this off, just take some time checking in with yourself as to where's the area for development in these areas of the wheel. Okay, just pause the video there and we're moving on now to self-regulation. Self-regulation, I've mentioned to you 2 or 3 times now about that ability to kind of control yourself, be aware of yourself, jumping in the helicopter, turning the dial down, what we call the third space. You might want to have a look at that on the internet. This ability to find time in between meetings to check in with yourself, get yourself focused for the next meeting. We don't have that, particularly when we're going back to back with online meetings. Techniques to relieve stress. For me it's running. That's my way of self-regulating. When I can feel the volcano kind of bubbling up with lots going on and spinning lots of place, out for a run helps me to self-regulate. For you, it might be something different. I'm going to give you some examples of ways that you can self-regulate that. Keeping the cool, counting to 10. The good old counting to 10 helps you to regulate your emotions. Another one for me is just walking towards the dog. The minute I can feel myself getting a little bit irritated and frustrated, walk towards the dog with the dog lead. I know the minute I've got the lead on the dog, I'm out for a walk for an hour. Surprise, surprise, when I come back home, I feel a lot more self-regulated than when I did in the moment. That ability to move from reactive to proactive, it says down the bottom. Again, a little video that you can watch here that talks about the different stages. It talks about childhood, actually, and mothers to babies or adults to babies need to regulate those babies. Then they grow up and there's co-regulation, and then in the end the baby regulates themselves into adulthood. So it talks about these different stages, and I'm sure when you think of some of your teens, there's some that still feel like they're on the bottle kind of thing in terms of the baby, and there's others that regulate and manage themselves well. So have a look at that video. That will help you to understand more about self-regulation. Here's some thoughts on the screen, just some little ideas, and they might not work for you. Some people use mindfulness, you know, a really good way of kind of centering yourself, as we call it, and regulating yourself. Some people journal, they write their thoughts down, and so other people read a book, take time out, doodle, walking, you know, whatever else it is, find ways to regulate yourself. Again, maybe you want to pause the video and think, how do I regulate myself? How do I get this rhythm and pattern, habit into my life where I can feel something bubbling up and I very quickly turn the gas down by regulating myself? Two little tests on motivation. There's just, we could do everything on motivation, but two little things that I think are important around motivation. One is understanding what your motivators are. If you went out and did a straw poll in the street, I could almost guarantee you that most people would say the primary thing that motivates people is money. And it's been proved consistently through research, it's not a motivator, it's not an ongoing motivator. You get this momentary lift maybe, but it doesn't sustain motivation. We need other things to deliver motivation. So we're going to just look at two very quick psychometrics which I can send through to you. They're also on the screen. First one to help you understand what it is that motivates you. What are those two or three things that maybe you knew, maybe you didn't know. Maybe they'll bring them to the surface of things that motivate you. And then secondly, how motivated are you? We're going to look at what's called Adams' equity scale, that talks about the balance that we have of what we give to our businesses versus what we get back, and how we can get that in balance. So this first little exercise, again, there's one in the packs that I can send you through, or just print it off on the screen, dead easy. The exercise here, it tells you exactly what to do. So along kind of sideways, if you can write along the top here when you print it off, 5 or 6 different times of your life where you felt the most motivated. In work, out of work, it doesn't matter. Where were you at your maximum motivation? First 10k I ran, first time, you know, getting a job, paycheck, getting married, having kids, building a house. Doesn't matter what it is, but just write as many areas along the top here sideways as you can. Areas, times of your life where you felt you're most motivated. Excuse me. Once you've written those along the top there, then compare them to these areas down on the left hand side, and if they've got anything to do with this area on the left hand side, just pop a tick in the box. You can put as many ticks in the box as you like coming down in the column. So say for instance my first one here was running a first 10k or something like that at the top here. Felt really motivated on that. Anything to do with money? No. Recognition? Not really, no. Pleasure? Definitely not for me. Challenge? Absolutely, I'd put a tick in a box. Feeling of accomplishment? Definitely tick in a box there. Obligation? No. Pressure? Yeah, a little bit of that. I'd put a tick in the box there, and so I could go down the column. Once I've gone down these columns and put ticks in the box in all the areas where I felt most motivated, I'm then going to total them up into this right hand column, and then pull out from that the top 2 or 3 areas. And its suggestion on this little model would be that they are your top motivators, whether they're in work or out of work. Quite often people have feeling of accomplishment and pressure, but other people have other motivators at times. So just take a moment to print that off and do that little exercise to tap into what your motivations are. Before you do the exercise, you might want to write down what you think your motivators are, and then see whether that little exercise comes out with the same answer or not. Second little exercise is called Adams' equity scale. There's a lot of information here, so do pause the video as we go along. Absolutely fine on that one. We've just got a couple more little areas that we're going to cover after Adams. Adams is about this set of scales, as I said. And the first little box up the top, what I'd like you to do is put 2 numbers in the top up the box with a little backslash. Thinking about how much you give to your organisation versus how much you get back from your organisation. What score would you give that out of 100? So it might be, I feel like I'm giving 80% effort to the organisation and I'm getting a kind of a 60% return. What's that trade-off look like for you? So just pop that in the top box, just a gut feel. What you give versus what you get back. Okay? And then once you've done that, in each of these areas a little bit more detailed, I want to give these areas a score out of 10. So in terms of time that you give to your business, out of 10, what would you say? 7, 8? What else is it? The effort that you put in, your ability to your skills, your talents, your flexibility, how flexible you are for your business, the commitment you give it, how reliable you are. I think all of these make sense. Heart and soul being, you give it absolutely everything. So give a score out of 10 to each of these areas and top that up down the bottom. Out of 100 down the bottom there, that would be great. And then on the right hand side, what do you get back from your business in terms of pay? How would you rate that out of 10? Bonus, perks, job security, the recognition that you get, maybe not a kind of a tangible reward, but recognition, promotion, reputation in the organisation, the praise and thanks you get, responsibility, sense of achievement. So top those up as well. And then if you've got 2 totals there, what I'd like you to do is compare those 2 totals with what you said right at the top, in the top box there. That would be really good. And see whether your gut feel at the beginning of that little exercise tallies with a little bit more data and intelligence. Have a read about Adam's equity scale on the internet. What he suggests is if your scores are 20 out, in other words, if the scales are tipping by 20 points or more, you need to start giving attention to things. We can all put up with some imbalance for a while, but how motivated are you at the moment? I would suggest that you check in with yourself once a year as to whether your motivators are changing, whether your scales are changing. Maybe you could do this with your team and find out how their scales are like, because all these things sit quietly under our emotions inside of us. No one comes to work with a t-shirt saying, just to let you know today, my inputs are 90% and my outputs are 25%. No one tells you that. These things sit quietly under the surface. Okay, we're just coming to the end now with 2 more areas. Empathy. Lots to say about empathy, but very little time. But it's a really important tool in the toolbox. We're not going to be using it every day in fast-paced commercial businesses. The empathy tool will sit in the toolbox a lot of the time, but are we ever using it? Do we pull it out? Some little QR codes you can read about empathy, but just on the screen here, 4 little areas for development maybe in relation to empathy. Something that we can practice and we can develop empathy. So that ability to see their world, stepping into their shoes, see things how they would. That's really difficult when you're in conflict, to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but something that you can develop. Really imagine yourself going into their worldview. How does it feel? And then bottom left hand corner, really trying to understand, not just cognitively, academically, but starting to try and feel how they're feeling. Appreciating them as human beings, even if you can't quite get your head around how they're feeling. You appreciate that they're a human and that they've got feelings. But then one of the most important skills, bottom right hand corner, is communicating that understanding. If we're feeling all these things or trying to work these things out but not communicating that, then the person's not going to know that we're being empathetic. So communicate your understanding, your empathy to that person. Just going to finish now with social skills, really, that ability to read environments. I call it sense making in leadership, kind of watching different things that are going on and making sense of it in your head. That's something, again, we can practice. We can watch room dynamics and work out what's going on. Sense making. Listening with intent. Nancy Klein's a great kind of author around listening and the importance of listening, and listening with intent. When we're listening in, leaning into people and listening to what they want, then we're trying to understand more about them and more about those abilities and build relationships with people. Looking at the non-verbal communication, the 7-38-55 as we call it, Morabian's law, 7% what you say, 38% tone of voice, 55% from the body impact. That's the problem with online. You can see in the little bubble here, I'm just about getting my hands in to add communication. That non-verbal communication, really important when we're developing our social skills and then being a person that can influence and persuade. There's whole books that have been written about that. Please ask if you want to know. Last slide, just some areas of social skills that you might want to look at developing. That ability to collaborate and cooperate, manage conflict as a healthy thing, to lead well, to be a change catalyst, that kind of almost like the spark in teams and in businesses, building bonds, building relationships, communication and influence, some areas for development. But again, lots that we could say around social skills. Let us know what area you want to develop on and we'll support you with resources. So that's about a 35-40 minute video, I think. Hope that's been useful on this enormous concept of emotional intelligence. You could read about it, study it. It's a lifetime's work as far as I'm concerned. So there's no way you're going to learn, read and have cracked it in 35 minutes. But I hope this little video has just kind of stimulated you thinking about what those elements of emotional intelligence are, those 5 areas, where it comes from, how we can develop emotionally intelligent people in ourselves, in our teams, in our businesses as a whole, but most importantly, how can I develop myself as an emotionally intelligent leader? What are the areas that I need to focus on? Maybe you just want to stop the video now and go back over some of those areas of development and tease through maybe 4 or 5 areas where you think I really need to work on those areas and see myself develop and grow as an emotionally intelligent leader. I hope that's been useful. Plenty more if you want it in terms of resources, just let me know and I'll send them on to you. Thanks, bye.